writing. You got a few of the details, a little lot. I want to try to set the story straight to you as best I can. To set the scene here in Boston, this is after the events of first the Boston Massacre, then the Tea Party, and the following passage of the Intolerable Acts. By now, there were 5,000 British soldiers stationed here in town, crowding out many more independent-minded locals as they sought to put the colony under martial law. But at this point, there's a spy network in town called the Sons of Liberty figured out that British soldiers planned on marching out towards the towns of Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts, a bit northwest of Boston, with the intent on seizing a stockpile of guns and ammunition out in Concord, as well as probably arresting important patriots, especially Samuel Adams and John Hancock, who were hiding out in Lexington at the time. They one put forth the word, not just the fact the soldiers were marching, but also which route they were going to take to get there. Whether they took the land route down the Boston Neck that I showed you in the map earlier, or if they took rowboats across Charles River to land in Cambridge up here, or Charlestown up here. So there's lines in the poem, such as one if by land, two if by sea, and I on the opposite shore will be. References to a signal of one or two lanterns to be hung in the steeple of the Old North Church and the North End here in Boston, as signal people in Charlestown which route the soldiers were taking. The poem makes sound like the signal to Paul Revere. More accurate was this was a signal from Paul Revere, who's afraid he might not be able to make it past the British warship stationed out at the mouth of Charles River that night. Wants to make sure the message got across the water, even if he himself could not. So it's believed he asked the men who worked at the church, including Robert Newman and John Pulling, to hold up 2 lanterns that night to show people in Charlestown the soldiers were taking the sea route. They ended up taking rowboats across Charles River to land at Leechmere Point, Cambridge, for marching northwest towards Lexington. Now Paul did make it across the water that night, and because of the signal, it's believed there was a horse waiting for him when he got to Charlestown, so he could almost immediately set off on his now famous midnight ride. But here's the thing. He wasn't actually, as most Americans have believed, shouting, the British are coming, the entire way. That's an invention to follow the poem. It would have been kind of silly if he was shouting this because everyone still considered themselves to be British citizens at the time. But like me shouting right now, hey, look out, the Americans are coming, the Americans are coming. People would just be confused by this. What do you mean we're coming? We're here. We live here. Get over it. Shut up. I'm trying to sleep. Which plenty of people were saying shut up and trying to sleep anyways. At least he figured out who he was and what was really going on. Rather than shout and scream the whole way, he was instead knocking on very specific doors. Every place where he stopped sent off midnight rides of their own, trying to spread the word surrounding towns and villages, and gather together as large a militia as possible to stand in opposition to the British soldiers and Lexington and Concord the next day. The names of most of these dozens of riders have been kind of forgotten in history. It was an illegal act they were committing, so for their own safety protection, good records are not kept as went off in these rides. But there are 3 important rides that night whose names you remember especially well. Paul Revere being just one of them. Another very important rider was named William Dawes. See, William Dawes went on his own midnight ride. He actually left Boston an hour before Paul Revere did, and he was sent by the same man who sent Paul Revere as well. The architect of this whole plan to run the countryside was a prominent member of the Sons of Liberty named Dr. Joseph Warren. Joseph Warren sent Paul Revere going the sea route through Charlestown, outlined in blue on the zoomed out map, and to double his chance of mess reach Lexington, sent William Dawes going the land route down the Boston Neck, outlined in red. According to legend, Dawes was selected for the task due to his very particular talent as an actor. Apparently, William Dawes could play a very convincing drunk, and supposedly he used his talent to get past British soldiers standing guard at the end of Boston Neck that night, who apparently thought if he was this sloppy riding home, he couldn't have any other motor guys trying to sleep it off. Also may have figured if they kept him around, they might have to clean up after. So they allowed him to go along on his way, was to come through Roxbury and Brookline for curving up through Cambridge on his way towards Lexington. It's unknown how many more times he may have been stopped by British soldiers as he rode through Cambridge that night. But his route was longer, and he reached Lexington about a half hour after Paul Revere did. Because of this, and because his name is a lot harder to rhyme, he gets left out of the famous poem. He's not nearly so well remembered today. A third important rider that night was named Dr. Samuel Prescott. Prescott was born in Concord, grew up there, knew the back roads a lot better than Paul Revere or William Dawes. Came across the 2 of them at about 1 in the morning in Lexington. Good thing he joined them because he'd be the only ride to make it all the way up to Concord. All 3 riders would be stopped by British soldiers along the road. Prescott and Dawes both tried to outrun the soldiers. With Dawes riding in the dark of night in unfamiliar territory, got thrown from his horse and slightly injured. Could not complete the ride. Prescott used his knowledge of the area to his advantage, jumped his horse over a low stone wall, probably similar height to that tabletop tomb, to safely board the soldiers and successfully bring the message out to Concord. Paul Revere wouldn't be so lucky. He was ambushed by the soldiers, surrounded, and then questioned at gunpoint for about 2 hours, forced to confess a lot of what was going on. But very cleverly, he exaggerated the numbers of colonial forces who already got to Lexington. So when these British soldiers heard a few muskets fire in the distance, Paul basically said to them, "Hear those shots? You may have me surrounded, but all my local militia friends, we have all of you surrounded. And if you don't want to be caught and captured yourselves, you should just let me go right now and go running back to Cambridge to meet the rest of your advancing army." And it worked. They let him go. But they kept his horse. Horse would never be returned. Paul then had to walk back to Lexington in the dark of night. And when he got there, he had another important job to do. Charged with the task of saving a chest of documents left behind by Hancock. These included a list of other members of Sons of Liberty. If the British soldiers got their hands on these, it could become a list of people to arrest, interrogate, try for treason, and possibly eventually hang. So to save these folks' lives, Paul was carrying this chest of documents across Lexington Green at about 5 in the morning of April 19, 1775. Before he could get 2/3 away across the green, British soldiers came marching into town. Some broke off in the battle formations. They couldn't see Paul as he and another man carried this chest off into the woods, because in between him and them were about 80 members of the Lexington militia who had already gathered on the green. And at this point, the details of history again get hazy, because the colonial militia claims British regulars who fired the first shot. British soldiers claimed colonial militia who fired the first shot. Whoever fired the first shot, it eventually earned a nickname that became commonly known as the shot heard round the world. After this first shot, it was the British soldiers who fired the first volley of shots, when they all fired at once, into colonial militia, who suffered 18 casualties. 18 men killed or wounded in this first set of shots alone, so immediately retreated into the woods to gain better cover, having lost about 25% of their numbers. The fighting had only just begun. For the entire rest of the day, colonial force continued to grow in size, as folks began pouring in by the thousands from surrounding towns and villages. They'd often fired the British soldiers from the sides of the road, then ducked behind houses, rocks, trees, and stone walls, doing the kind of guerrilla warfare fighting that became emblematic of American force throughout the Revolutionary War. British soldiers would suffer about 300 casualties over the course of the day, as they marched from Lexington to Concord back through Lexington, on the way to Charlestown, before they could finally board rowboats and reach the safety of the city of Boston. These are the first battles of the American Revolutionary War, fought on April 19, 1775. All able to take place because Paul Revere, William Dawes, Samuel Prescott, and dozens of other forgotten and unnamed riders went off on those midnight rides to gather together forces to fight in Lexington and Concord. And for that, I keep sharing the stories and tipping my hat.
Interesting picture. It looks like the outdoors.